Thank you for watching Amish Eel 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources. Following are the news reported by American, European, Asian, African channels. Asian African channels have reported the same news as the other channels. All news agencies also have same news. Helicopter crash investigation. Plastic recycling problem in America. Conservation at Cape Cod. No ceasefire in Gaza in near future. Children are dying. Yesterday, 20 people died in Israeli bombing. 3 people shot dead in Pennsylvania. The suspect is still at large. Plane and flying problems. Protest in Russia after election. Ukraine attacked the city of Volgograd in Moscow in Russia. Saving wildlife in Canada and breast cancer cases in Canada are rising. Now the news in detail.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, after a string of fatal helicopter crashes, we examine their safety and reliability. Then the myth of plastic recycling, how the plastics industry knew for decades it was not a viable solution. And off the coast of Cape Cod, a conservation success story with human implications, a surge in sharks creeping closer to the shore.
Cape Cod has exploded as an area that draws people to enjoy this environment. And so now the predator's coming back to feed on its prey, but it's overlapping with human activities. And certainly humans are not used to that, but they're coming to grips with it.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions and friends of the News Hour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Tonight, nearly 1.5 million Gazans are sheltering in the southern city of Rafah, the last remaining haven on the Gaza Strip, as Israel moves towards sending ground forces into the city. Across northern Gaza, there were more airdrops of aid from the United States, Jordan, and Germany. The UN says a quarter of the population of Gaza is starving, and some say the aid isn't enough.
The situation is so bad that no one can imagine it, and the ship, even if it helps, will be a drop in the ocean, because the entire region is in need. They throw us airdrops of aid, and we run like dogs behind the airdrops.
In central Gaza, Israeli bombs were also delivered by plane. Gaza hospital officials say about 20 people were killed overnight in an Israeli strike on a refugee camp. They said nearly half of them were children. Talks aimed at a deal for the release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners are expected to resume tomorrow in Doha, Qatar. Hamas has proposed an eventual permanent ceasefire, something that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says is out of the question. Police have surrounded a home in Trenton, New Jersey at this hour where a 26-year-old shooting suspect has barricaded himself. Trenton police say the residents of the home have been evacuated. The suspect is armed with an AR-15 style long gun and is believed to have killed at least 3 people in Falls Township, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Philadelphia. There was a shelter-in-place order, but it's been lifted. Police said the suspect knew his victims and that the shooting was the result of a domestic situation. There's been another incident involving a Boeing jetliner. An older United Airlines 737 landed safely in Oregon on Friday, minus a large external panel along the plane's belly. There were no indications of trouble during the flight, and the missing panel was only discovered during a post-flight inspection. Both United and the FAA are investigating. In Russia, protest on the second day of voting in the country's 3-day presidential election. Protesters tried to set fire to voting booths and poured green dye into ballot boxes. At least a half dozen cases of vandalism have been reported at polling stations as supporters of the late opposition leader Alexei Navalny try to undermine President Vladimir Putin's hold on power. Putin's facing no serious challengers and is almost certain to win another 6-year term. Meanwhile, in Belgorod, Russian officials say Ukrainians shelled the border city, killing 2 people. And more Americans are tying the knot. CDC says marriages are back to pre-pandemic levels. During the COVID-19 isolation, marriages dropped to the lowest level since 1963. But despite this uptick, marriages in the United States remain in a decades-long decline. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, the problems with plastic recycling and how plastic makers knew it wouldn't work, and tracking the surge in sharks off the Cape Cod coast.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS News Hour, weeknights on PBS.
Late last month, the head of a Nigerian bank, his wife, son, and 3 others were killed when the helicopter taking them to Las Vegas crashed in California's Mojave Desert. Also, late last month, the Army National Guard temporarily halted all its helicopter operations after fatal crashes in Utah and Mississippi. And that followed the Army's temporary grounding late last year of its Osprey aircraft, which can function as a helicopter. These incidents and recent high-profile accidents, like the one that killed basketball star Kobe Bryant and his daughter in 2020, and 2019's tour helicopter crash in Hawaii that killed 7, raised questions in people's minds about the safety of helicopters. John Gully is a former member of the National Transportation Safety Board and former chair of the National Coalition for Aviation Education. John, we may be seeing a lot more helicopters as air taxis are being developed as soon as next year. Quite simply, are helicopters safe?
Helicopters, the vehicle itself is very safe. What we're seeing today is a lot of issues where we have pilot issues and maybe not monitoring their operations well enough. You mentioned 2 accidents, a Nigerian fellow who died and Kobe Bryant. Both of those were helicopter pilots that disregarded weather cues in order to accomplish the mission. And that self-imposed pressure that they have on themselves to get the mission done oftentimes is the driver behind the event that leads to a crash.
And those military groundings we talked about, what they call stand-downs, those were to make sure that the crews, the pilots understood the operating guidelines, or were they worried about the craft themselves?
Most of the time, the craft is pretty reliable. And there's been a few instances where there was a mechanical problem. But the real issue is the pilots. Usually get single pilot operations, especially in the military. It's get it done. I got a mission to do, I'm going to get it done. Well, when you're not in a war zone, you have a lot more flexibility, but sometimes it's difficult for people to separate those 2 events.
Pilot error, is it more difficult? Are helicopters trickier, more difficult to fly than fixed-wing aircraft?
Helicopters require a lot of concentration. In an airplane, oftentimes, with the automation that's in there, that you don't have to focus as much. helicopters, you have to maintain your focus from beginning to end. And so sometimes people will lose their focus, and when the consequences are severe.
Is there a narrower margin of error with a helicopter than a fixed-wing aircraft?
Yes, but if you're talking about the pilot, yes, it's its concentration that it has to be maintained. And the helicopter industry themselves has taken a page out of the commercial aviation playbook with their safety teams, and really driving down, analyzing virtually every mishap that happens, and looking at the cause and identifying that for the pilots that are flying today. So getting caught up in bad weather, that's a major contributor to helicopter accidents. Fatigue on the part of the pilots, which leads to that lack of concentration, that's a major factor in accidents.
Can that problem be addressed with regulations, guidelines about training, about recertification?
The helicopter industry has a very robust set of regulations. If the pilot's not going to follow the guidelines for weather, sooner or later it's going to lead to a bad outcome. That's not a regulation issue. That's that individual pilot issue. So I don't know that at this point in time we need additional regulations, but we need to have a very robust training program, which the industry themselves is pushing for, in order to make sure that the pilots don't lose sight of the fact that they need to maintain their skills and their attention to accomplishing the job, not just getting the mission done.
Is the pipeline for helicopter pilots with those skills, that concentration, that ability to safely fly a helicopter, is that big enough, or is there a supply problem?
There is a bit of a supply problem, because most of them come out of the military, and the military is having problems building their own pilots, so that they're not letting them out, so to speak. They're providing additional bonuses to keep them in the military, because training takes a lot of resources, a lot of money to train a pilot. There are commercial trainers, but they're only a fraction compared to what the military supplies.
Most people's experience with helicopters these days really is probably sightseeing tours, like over Hawaii, the Grand Canyon. A tourist out there about to get on a helicopter, thinking about taking one of these tours, what would you say to them?
Well, I've taken them myself, so I don't think they're particularly dangerous, but there are certain pilots that like to give the people that are on the helicopter the thrill of the adventure, and I have been on some of those helicopters too, unannounced, that I've had thrilling rides. And again, it's up to the individual, because he's alone. He doesn't have the company representative over his shoulder. He doesn't have the FAA looking at him until it's something bad happens. So yes, you need to be concerned, and sometimes you need to have a conversation if you're chartering a helicopter, what you expect from that pilot. So if you have it beforehand, say, if the weather gets bad, I don't mind if we don't go. So make sure they understand that this is a mission critical. I don't have to accomplish this task, getting me from point A to B, that it's okay that we don't go.
John Goley, a former member of the NTSB. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
On average, the world produces 430 million metric tons of plastic every year. The United States alone produces tens of millions of tons of plastic waste annually. Yet, on average in the United States, only about 5 to 6% of plastic is recycled. Ali Rogan digs into a new report covering the plastic industry's tactics to push recycling and avoid regulation.
A new report by the Center for Climate Integrity, an environmentalist group, says newly uncovered statements from oil and plastics executives underscore the industry's decades-long secret skepticism about the viability and efficacy of recycling. The authors of the report reviewed old investigations and new documents, including previously unknown assertions from industry executives. In 1994, one Exxon chemical executive put the industry's support for plastics recycling in blunt terms, saying, quote, "We are committed to the activities, but not committed to the results." Another representative from DuPont noted in 1992 that recycling goals were set, knowing full well, quote, "they were unlikely to meet them." Michael Copley is a correspondent covering climate issues for NPR. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. Some of these quotes that are in this report are very blunt. They might be shocking to some, but you've been covering these issues for a long time. Were you surprised by anything that's in this new report?
Yeah, I think what's in the report echoes a lot of what we've been seeing from previous investigations, and that is that the plastics industry pushed recycling as a solution, even though industry officials have known for a long time that it wasn't going to be viable at scale, or that they had serious doubts about its ability to be viable at scale. What we've seen is that they really looked at recycling as a way to kind of fend off regulation and to keep selling more plastic. And so we've known about that. I think it's always striking when you see a report like this that unearths new statements, new quotes, and to see the way in which they really seem to view recycling as sort of a public relations tool as opposed to an environmental tool that they sort of presented publicly.
Many of the most eyebrow-raising quotes from this report are 10, 20, even 30 years old. If they're so old, why should we be paying attention to them today?
So right now what the industry is saying is the focus on these comments doesn't accurately reflect where the industry is today. And so what it's asking for is sort of the public to trust it, that it's working on this new technology that is going to solve the problem of plastic waste now. And I think that the historical record sort of undercuts public trust in the industry and raises questions about those assertions now. I think the other reason why this matters is it could potentially be legally problematic for the industry. By that I mean the oil and gas industry right now is facing dozens of lawsuits from states and localities based in part on statements it made about climate change and fossil fuel going back decades. We know that the state of California has opened an investigation into the role of oil and gas companies in the petrochemical industry in kind of the creation of the plastic waste crisis that we're facing. And the group that put up the report, the Center for Climate Integrity, was upfront saying that it was compiling this to serve as kind of the fact basis or the basis of evidence for potential legal action.
I want to read a response we got from a plastics trade group called America's Plastic Makers. Their president accused this report and the authors of it of citing, quote, outdated, decades-old technologies, and says it's mischaracterizing the current state of the industry, as you were just talking about. This group also says that plastic makers are looking to have all plastic packaging be, quote, reused, recycled, and recovered by 2040. So you just mentioned this, but where does plastics recycling technology stand right now? How advanced is that technology?
So the industry has presented advanced recycling, chemical recycling as a real solution. There is deep skepticism of it, and not just from sort of the environmentalists who you'll talk to, but
and I should note here, Michael, that advanced recycling is actually a term of art that is used among the plastics industry to describe the current state of this recycling.
Yeah, that's right. And so as opposed to sort of traditional mechanical recycling, what they're doing now is turning plastics sort of back into liquids and gases to sort of reuse. The skepticism comes from questions about, has anything about the economics of recycling changed? If in the past it was cheaper to make new plastic, why is that not still the case, especially when you see low oil and gas prices? And the other piece of it is plastic degrades over time. And so what scientists say is that there are just limits to how many times you can reuse plastics. So there is deep skepticism.
What does your reporting say about this claim that all plastics will be recyclable by the year 2040?
Obviously, the industry has put out this promise. I think that its critics will say we've been hearing these promises or promises like it for decades now, and that there's nothing in the record to think that now is any different.
Is there a solution here that climate activists and environmental experts agree on that actually includes recycling, or is there consensus among that side of the issue that stakeholders need to be looking at solutions beyond recycling? That recycling is not the be-all, end-all to avert the climate crisis that experts will point to and say we're in.
There's a recognition that plastic is so ingrained in modern life, and it plays important roles in medical devices and other things, that it's almost impossible to envision a world where we move completely beyond plastic. I think what people are talking about is reducing plastic production to a level that is more manageable with kind of recycling systems, getting rid of types of plastic that are especially hard to recycle, you can't recycle, being more transparent about what chemicals go into this stuff that, again, make recycling hard. But it really does come down to, when you talk to not just activists, but also businesses increasingly, that regulation is going to play a big role. And so that, there was a hearing in the Senate, and the head of SC Johnson, a big consumer goods company, said something to the effect of, we need government regulation. Businesses can't do this on their own. And I think, again, that gets back in large part to the economics of this. If companies don't have to deal with these costs, it's hard to imagine that they will, in sort of a sustained way, create systems to deal with this if they don't have to.
Michael Copley, correspondent covering climate issues for NPR. Thank you so much for breaking this down for us.
Thanks, Ellen.
Environmental efforts to protect sharks in recent years has resulted in a huge increase in the great white shark population off the New England coast. It's a conservation success story with potentially unnerving implications for beachgoers. David Wright of Rhode Island PBS Weekly went out with one conservation group, which is tracking the rise of the world's biggest known predatory fish.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, it's not that little, comes a pointed reminder that you might want to think twice, at least in Cape Cod.
I guess the headline is, there are lots of sharks here, more than we thought.
Yes.
Megan Winton of the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy is one of the authors of a new study documenting a surge in the population of great white sharks here in recent years.
And what's your best estimate?
So the best estimate is over that 4-year period that 800 individual white sharks visited the waters off of Cape Cod.
She and her colleagues have spent years patrolling these waters, tracking every shark they encounter. They recently let us tag along.
We did just get one. Okay, so it says white shark spotted 100 yards off southernmost part of Nauset ORV.
Overhead, they have a spotter plane. The pilot, Wayne, keeps a sharp eye out. On the boat, they have underwater cameras, microphones, and a ready supply of these things.
It's just kind of like an easy pass for sharks. This thing. I mean, that's the simplest way to explain it.
Do you charge toll?
We should start.
A radio beacon with batteries that last 10 years. Every time a tagged shark swims past one of these yellow buoys, it sends out a ping. The Conservancy relies on citizen sightings, too, from a growing number of eco-tour boats. You get to see some?
Yeah, it's super shallow here. About 14 feet, it wasn't tagged.
People on that boat tell us they saw a 14-footer here moments ago. Every sighting, from people or pings, gets relayed to an app you can download, Sharktivity. They've identified more than 600 individual sharks here over the past 10 years.
So I bet your app is fairly popular among beachgoers.
I mean, I'd like to think so. It is. It's been downloaded over 100,000 times at this point, and it's a great platform for us to report sightings when we're out on the water, for eco-tour boats to report sightings, and for anybody who's out.
It may come as a surprise to know that nearly 50 years ago, when Steven Spielberg scared the pants off just about everybody with his iconic movie about sharks in this part of the Atlantic, the population of great whites here was in danger of dying out. Greg Scommel was still in grade school when Jaws came out. The movie caught his imagination in the best possible way.
I was motivated by the scientist in the film, as were a lot of colleagues of mine at the time, to become shark biologists. So as a young kid watching that, I was thinking, wow, this is a really cool job.
Scommel has personally tagged more than 300 sharks, fulfilling his dream at a time when Cape Cod is finally beginning to see the dividends of decades of marine conservation efforts. Over the last 50 years, the Marine Mammal Protection Act gradually helped bring back the seals and the sharks who prey on them.
If you think about it, in the time that both sharks and seals were gone, Cape Cod has exploded as an area that draws people to enjoy this environment. And so now the predator's coming back to feed on its prey, but it's overlapping with human activities. And certainly humans are not used to that. And so, but they're coming to grips with it.
The team deploys a drone for a bird's eye view of the water. What they tend to find is that the sharks spend about half their time in water that's less than 15 feet deep.
We've got the seals, which love the beautiful beaches of Cape Cod. So do people, and the sharks are coming in close to shore to hunt for seals. So there is an overlap of these three species.
It has a tag.
Finally, late in the day, a bona fide sighting.
Pretty.
Greg Scommel climbs out onto the pulpit like a friendly Captain Ahab, armed not with a harpoon, but a GoPro camera. A 14-footer, a teenager, not yet fully grown. Great white sharks are 4 feet long when they're born. They can grow up to 20 feet long. Their lifespan, more than 70 years.
So that shark right there is one that we tagged a few weeks ago, right in this exact same area. So clearly it's been sticking around, and I think the only reason they stick around is if they're successfully feeding, because no point in staying in an area where you're not having any success.
Most of the regulars have nicknames. Not this one, yet.
Who gets the name?
We've got a donor in the queue who gets to name that shark, and that program helps us fund the cost of research trips.
So you contribute a little to the work that you guys are doing?
Yes.
And you get to name a shark?
Exactly. It's a pretty cool thing.
How much does a shark's name go for these days?
$2,500.
That nickname will pay for another day out on the water like this one. For PBS News Weekend, I'm David Wright in Chatham, Massachusetts.
And finally tonight, how do you parent a rescued newborn fox? Well, if you're at the Richmond, Virginia Wildlife Center, you wear a fox mask. Because the goal is to reintroduce the kid into its natural habitat, she needs to keep a healthy fear of people. So the masks keep it from becoming too attached to its human caretakers. They also try not to speak while they're with her, and have given her a stuffed animal to try to make her feel like she's with her real mother. This newborn fox arrived at the Wildlife Center a few weeks back after a Richmond man mistook it for a kitten and turned her over to a local humane shelter. The Richmond Wildlife Center was founded in 2010 to provide veterinary care for all animals in the area. It operates solely on donations. Right now on the PBS NewsHour YouTube channel, the challenges of getting aid into Gaza as the humanitarian crisis there worsens. All that and more is on the official PBS NewsHour YouTube channel. And that is PBS News Weekend for this Saturday. On Sunday, concerns about the recent decline in support for LGBTQ rights, reversing years of
Rochelle Harrison-Pless, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
Further airstrikes are reported overnight in Gaza as Hamas makes a new offer for a ceasefire and prisoner hostage exchanges. One of the missiles has hit a home, killing dozens of members of the same family. At least 2 people are killed by a Ukrainian missile strike in the Russian city of Belgorod, forcing the closure of schools and shops and bringing the fighting to Russian soil as voting continues for the presidential election. The date is announced for India's general election, where almost 1 billion people are eligible to vote. 24 opposition parties are joining forces to try to topple the popular Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who's seeking a third term. Welcome to those of you just joining us here on France 24. I'm Alexander Orcott. We begin in the Gaza Strip during what is turning out to be a bloody Ramadan for Palestinians in the enclave, with Israel continuing to carry out dozens of bombings each and every day. At the Nuseirat, a refugee camp in central Gaza, an airstrike hit one home that killed 36 members of the same family.
Dozens of family members killed in one single strike. They had gathered to mark the start of a day's fast before the unimaginable happened. More than 2/3 of the victims were women and children, according to hospital records. The Tabatibi family had already been displaced by Israeli bombing. This is where they were sheltering. A house in the Nuseirat refugee camp, now left unrecognizable by Friday's strike. Yusuf Tabatibi survived the attack. He fears more people may be buried under the building's tangled ruins.
As you can see, we're attempting to retrieve martyrs. What should we do? God help us.
After searching with his bare hands, Yusuf manages to find another victim.
There are the remains we retrieved from this 4-story building. There are 2 destroyed floors on the ground. We're unable to retrieve some of the martyrs. We don't have equipment, bulldozers, machinery, or anything else. We have to try to retrieve them with only our hands. We brought shovels and hammers, but to no avail. Look at the extent of the destruction.
The Hamas-run health ministry says Israel is responsible for the strike. The Israeli military says it's looking into the incident. Authorities say the attack in Nuseirat was one of 60 deadly airstrikes reported overnight Friday from Gaza City in the north to Rafah in the south.
On top of the deaths from the fighting, there are fears that still more lives will be lost because of hunger in the Gaza Strip. Unable to get enough food through by land, the first sea delivery has now successfully been brought ashore.
Their first delivery has successfully reached Gaza by sea, and NGOs are ready to send new ones from Cyprus as quickly as possible.
We are loading a new boat, ready to deliver more aid. Inside those pallets we have beans, canned meat, we have flour, rice, and of course we have dates. This is happening, we are working non-stop to make this possible.
This delivery by boat took months of planning and negotiation. For NGOs, this was a race against time, as more and more Gazans face acute shortages. This makeshift jetty was built to open this route. The supplies are not close to meeting the needs in Gaza. Still, it's a way of stepping up aid efforts.
This is a first step, and it opens the way for ships with greater capacity to see that it is possible. Obviously, it is somewhat precarious, but surely it will be possible to continue working on the dock.
Germany has made its first aid deliveries by air, but humanitarians all agree far more aid needs to be brought in by land, the most effective way to reduce people's suffering. Children have died due to malnutrition in the north of the enclave. UN agencies say that 1 in 3 children aged under 2 in that area is acutely malnourished. Famine is looming. That's when more than 20% of the population faces extreme food shortages.
Now, friends and relatives of the Israeli hostages are keeping up pressure on the Israeli government to secure their releases, staging another major rally in Tel Aviv on Saturday, more than 5 months after they were initially taken. There's fears that time is now running out, and they want the government to seriously engage in talks with Hamas, which has proposed now a new deal for a ceasefire and hostage prisoner releases after the Israeli government previously called the demands unreasonable, and it is now planning to send a delegation to the talks in Qatar. Now, in parallel with the Gaza war, Iran-aligned Hezbollah fighters have been exchanging fire with Israel across Lebanon's southern border. The clashes have caused misery for tens of thousands of Lebanese people who've been driven from their homes.
Some 60 families are bringing the dining hall of the abandoned Montana hotel back to life as they break their Ramadan fasts.
I came to this hotel as a displaced person 3 months ago. We fled our village because of the bombing. My house was damaged. I fear for my children and for myself. We are not distressed about the accommodation now, and thankfully we are happy that everything is provided for us. But we are not in our own homes to act as we please.
More than 90,000 people have been displaced in southern Lebanon by the ongoing near-daily clashes that have occurred since Israel's war with Gaza. At the hotel, life is often monotonous, and Ramadan offers a brief respite of activity. Children have been largely unable to attend school, as they can only do so online in the few hours the hotel has electricity. The adults have spent months without jobs, leading to mental strain and listlessness.
We're a defeated group, forced out against our will. But if a ceasefire is declared now, we'll immediately turn to our homes and lands. We'll resume our work, children will go back to school, and life will return to normal.
Such a return seems a long way off, however, as the border conflict only grows more intense. Since October, Israeli strikes have killed more than 300 people in Lebanon, while Hezbollah attacks have killed about 20 people in Israel.
Moving on now to other world news, and Ukraine has launched several drones at a Slavyansk oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar region, this east of the Crimean Peninsula on the Russian mainland. Moscow said its air defenses brought down the unmanned aircraft, but the falling debris still managed to spark a fire. One person is said to have died from a heart attack. This follows shortly after 2 people were killed by Ukrainian shelling in the Russian city of Belgorod, around 40 kilometers across the border from Kharkiv in the north.
Charred vehicles with shattered windscreens. It's the aftermath of Ukrainian shelling which hit this car park in Belgorod. According to Russian authorities, residents were left shaken.
I live nearby. I heard the blast and ran out to see something burning. I ran up. Neighboring buildings were on fire.
In buildings nearby, some windows were blown out by the blast.
The sirens went off. My youngest child and I ran into the corridor in the first seconds. The blast started, and a missile flew past. Then a bright flash, not very loud. Everything happened very fast. The doors flew open. The windows were thrown out.
The Belgorod region has become the frequent target of Ukrainian cross-border attacks that come in response to Russia's war in Ukraine. These videos released by Russia's defense ministry claim to show what the ministry says are Ukrainian soldiers attempting an incursion into Belgorod. The region is on high alert.
The situation is quite complicated now in the city and the Belgorod region. Of course, the main issue for us is security. Today, I will definitely try to give operational information on the current situation. We have decided that shopping centers in the Belgorod region will not be open on Sunday and Monday.
On Saturday, Russia's defense ministry said it had intercepted missiles, drones and rockets over Belgorod and Kursk, another border region. It comes in the midst of Russia's presidential elections, with Putin accusing Ukraine of attempting to, quote, disrupt his bid for another mandate. The president has promised a harsh response.
Now we're going to take a brief look through some of the other stories making world headlines. As we heard at the end of that report, Ukrainian shelling came during the second day of voting in the presidential election. Now to the third day, it's all but certain to extend Vladimir Putin's rule by another 6 years after he crushed any opposition, with 71-year-old president facing only 3 token rivals from Kremlin-friendly parties who've refrained from any criticism of either him or the war. 7 gang members have been killed in the Haitian capital after police conducted an operation against the notorious gang leader nicknamed Barbecue. He, along with other armed groups, currently control 80% of Port-au-Prince. It comes days after Prime Minister Ariel Henry announced he's stepping down, pushing the country further into uncertainty. The late winter storm has buried north-central Colorado in more than a metre of snow for several days now, causing major disruptions. Crews have been working round the clock to clear the main roads, but people have been warned that travel in the mountains and foothills west of Denver is hazardous. Thousands have also been left without power. The world's largest democracy, India, will be heading to the polls in several phases from late April to early June. The Election Commission has announced the date. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Bharatiya Janata Party is widely expected to secure a third term in power. He will be up against an alliance of some 24 opposition groups united behind the main opposition Congress Party. Charlotte Hughes has more.
With almost 1 billion eligible voters, India's election is set to be the largest the world has ever seen. Voters will elect a new parliament in 7 stages from April the 19th to early June, with results expected on June the 4th. Opinion polls suggest a victory for Narendra Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party, which is widely expected to secure more than the 272 of 543 seats required for a simple majority. In a post on social media, the Hindu nationalist Prime Minister seemed optimistic for another win.
I have full confidence that we'll get the full affection and blessings of voters for the 3rd consecutive time.
Modi's talking points include investment in infrastructure, welfare programs, and the party's agenda for Hindu reawakening. Challenging him is a coalition bloc of more than 24 opposition parties, known as the Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance. The main opposition Congress Party is leading the alliance. In a post on social media, the party's president called for voter support.
This will perhaps be the last chance to save democracy and our constitution from dictatorship. We, the people of India, will together fight against hatred, unemployment, price rise, and atrocities.
Electronic voting machines will be used for the election. 2,400 political parties are expected to contend.
After the UK and Vaughan Gething has won the Labour Party leadership contest in Wales, meaning he'll soon take over as First Minister of the devolved Parliament there. His appointment meaning all the parliaments in Great Britain are now led by people of minority ethnic backgrounds. 50-year-old born to a Welsh father and Zambian mother spoke proudly of his heritage, claiming to be having the honour of the first black leader of any European country.
It hasn't happened before. That isn't because other people haven't wanted to, haven't the drive, the determination or the ability. I'm the only person that looks like me to represent a Welsh constituency in either of our national parliaments.
Some stunning and somewhat terrifying pictures coming to us right now overnight from Iceland, where lava has begun spewing out of yet another volcanic fissure that's opened. This is the 4th time the volcano has erupted since December, and it's caused the authorities once more to declare a state of emergency in the peninsula. And the Grindavik fishing town, usually home to almost 4,000 residents, has once again been evacuated after an earlier eruption destroyed homes there. We'll leave you with these pictures. Stay tuned to us here on France 24. There's plenty more world news coming up.
On this Saturday night, special delivery. The first shipment of aid arrives by sea to Gaza as the number of children facing starvation soars.
It's a war on women and children.
With another round of ceasefire talks set to resume. Battling breast cancer.
This is critically important we address this issue now.
A Hollywood celebrity story raising questions about screening in Canada. Plus, weird wildlife. How Nova Scotia is helping this feisty but furless raccoon.
Global National with Foreign Essay. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. The largest humanitarian organization in Gaza says the situation unfolding in the Strip is deteriorating by the minute, and new numbers from the UN show children are the hardest hit. In northern Gaza, at least 31% of infants under the age of 2 suffered from acute malnutrition in February. That's twice as many as the previous month. Evidence the UN says that hunger is spreading fast and reaching devastating and unprecedented levels. Some relief arrived overnight, the first shipment of aid to reach Gaza by sea in almost 2 decades. There's also a glimmer of hope for a pause in fighting, with news today that talks between Israel and Hamas will resume as early as tomorrow. Mackenzie Gray has our top story tonight.
The first ship's worth of food aid have arrived in Gaza 150 days after the war started, sent by Spanish and American NGOs, with more shipments to come soon.
We are right now at night, working non-stop to get more aid to Gaza.
200 tons of food made its way into Gaza in the first shipment, but that will only help a small number of people who are going hungry. The UN reporting a quarter of Gaza's entire population is at risk of famine, leading to desperate scenes like this. Children sent to go fishing in a bid to find any food.
This is a war on civilians. It's a war on women and children. It's a war on human rights.
The Germans and French join the growing number of military airdrops of aid into Gaza, as the German chancellor is headed to Israel to tell President Benjamin Netanyahu to allow for more aid into Gaza, and to join the growing number of Western countries pushing him to not launch a large-scale invasion of Rafah.
We can't support a major offensive in Rafah that doesn't also include a credible, achievable, executable plan to take care for the safety and security of the more than 1 million Gazans that are seeking refuge in Rafah.
Despite Western pressure, Netanyahu and his cabinet approved plans for both an offensive into Rafah and evacuation of civilians, but continued peace talks mean those plans might not need to be used. The New York Times reporting Hamas is no longer demanding Israel agree to a permanent ceasefire for hostages and prisoner exchanges to resume. Instead, Israeli troops would have a phased pullback from parts of Gaza as hostages are released. Proposals that will continue to be discussed at peace talks in Doha, Qatar, with a new team of Israeli negotiators that were sent on Friday. Mackenzie Gray, Global News, Ottawa.
Residents in Haiti are bracing for another tense night with surging violence and a ballooning humanitarian crisis. Attacks continued in Haiti's capital in the aftermath of the resignation of the country's prime minister this week. A transitional government could be appointed by the end of the weekend, as aid groups warn of growing hunger and severe malnutrition, as the violence makes it harder for people to safely find food. Growing numbers are now traveling to neighboring Dominican Republic to bring food and other supplies back home across the border. And Mercedes Stevenson has more on the Canadian response to that crisis. Mercedes.
Jeff, as the world watches the situation in Haiti deteriorate, some countries, including Canada, have evacuated their non-essential diplomatic staff from the country due to the rising risk of gang violence. On this week's The West Block, Canada's ambassador to Haiti told me the last thing that he wants to do is to have to pull all diplomatic staff out of the embassy. But security concerns are indeed top of mind.
I won't disclose my location, but I can assure you that I'm well equipped. I have water, food, and good security, so I'm not worried for my own personal safety. I mean, we have to be careful.
Back when U.S. President Joe Biden had visited Canada, he had hoped this country would lead a multinational force in Haiti, but the Canadian government did not step in, concerned about military resources and the potential deaths of Canadian soldiers and police. I asked the ambassador about Canada's hesitancy to get involved in Haiti on the ground.
I think we have to be realistic about our own capacity, and what we are doing is really playing on our strength, providing something that is definitely needed, training in a third country.
We also spoke to Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Ray. He raised concerns about illegal U.S. weapons that are flowing towards Haiti, and those guns which are ending up in the hands of gangs who have seized control of the country.
We need greater effort from the Americans on the export of arms from their country to Haiti. We have to understand that the largest source of guns in Haiti, and frankly in the Caribbean, is the United States of America. And we've talked to the Americans about this.
Ray says a made-in-Haiti solution is required, but with international support. Ambassador Ray also says Haiti's collapse would have, quote, a devastating impact on North America. Jeff?
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thanks, Mercedes. And you can watch the full interviews tomorrow morning on the West Block, right here on Global. Well, another day, another incident involving a Boeing passenger plane. U.S. authorities are now investigating how a United Airlines 737 lost an external panel. The flight landed safely in Oregon, carrying 139 passengers. No one noticed the panel was missing until after the 25-year-old plane had arrived. A local newspaper posted what appears to be a photo of the plane's underbelly. It will remain grounded until United completes an investigation. In Calgary, a man is dead following an armed standoff with police that lasted for more than 30 hours. It began on Thursday when officers tried to execute a search warrant at a home in the city's northeast. They say a man began shooting at police, firing more than 100 rounds. Police say the situation escalated Friday evening and the suspect was ultimately shot and killed. No one else was hurt. A child welfare agency in Manitoba has begun removing 20 high-risk, high-needs teenagers from 13 privately owned group homes. It comes on the heels of the province severing ties with the operator, Spirit Rising House, after cannabis was given to teens in one of those homes as a harm reduction measure. But staff tell Global News that, quote, knee-jerk reactions have had a devastating toll. Melissa Ridgen has this Global News exclusive.
I just worry with just the behavioral changes we've seen.
These are caregivers of some of the most vulnerable high-needs kids in Manitoba.
There's a lot of fear in these kids, I suppose.
Fear over what comes next as they're being uprooted following a spat between Spirit Rising group homes and the Manitoba government, prompting the teens' legal guardian, Southeast Child and Family Services, to order their removal.
We were told anytime before the 27th that they could be removed, so it could be today, it could be the 27th.
All in response to staff at one of Spirit Rising's 13 group homes giving teens marijuana to keep them from drug seeking on the streets.
They can hand out clean needles on the streets and hand out Narcan, but it's not okay to give a kid pot, which I know that doesn't do any damage to anybody. It's saving my daughter's life.
Voices like that and the kids themselves ignored, say these caregivers.
Suicide attempts, AWOLs, drug use, destabilization all around of the unknown. It's very heartbreaking to see.
The challenge now, keeping the rest safe.
We're being used until they rip them from the homes that they've had, that they love, with people they love.
We asked Southeast CFS what supports are being offered and if there were enough suitable homes for these high-needs teens in Manitoba's overloaded child welfare system. They didn't respond. Families Minister Nahani Fontaine is traveling out of province, but a statement from her department says the priority right now is finding safe new placements for youth in the care of Spirit Rising House. Caregivers say those words are empty and have this plea.
Come talk to our damn kids.
Exactly. They need to be heard.
Melissa Ridgen, Global News, Winnipeg.
Online screening for breast cancer made headlines this week after actress Olivia Munn revealed how a simple risk assessment saved her life. Around 1 in 9 Canadian women are expected to develop breast cancer during their lifetime. Catherine Ward reports on the risk assessment tools for Canadians.
3 days after this Oscars red carpet appearance, actress Olivia Munn posted to Instagram revealing her cancer diagnosis. Munn's experience is driving home the importance of early detection. A genetic test for 90 different cancers found Munn was not a carrier for common cancer genes, but still her doctor calculated her breast cancer risk assessment score. That led to more thorough physical testing and the discovery that Munn actually had luminal B cancer in both breasts. 30 days later, she went in for double mastectomy surgery. Ontario Health's online assessment tool is one of several options that work similarly. Basically, you agree to the terms and conditions, click Start Now, and then you're directed to a questionnaire. Questions focus on common risk factors, including family history, genetics, and lifestyle. Advocates say online tools are a good first step to encourage people to self-screen, but not a replacement.
Use the assessment tool, but don't rely only on that and get those mammograms done. They are still our best first line of defense for breast cancer. And the earlier we catch it, the more curable it is.
Throughout her 40s, Natalie Quadrants pushed for mammograms, despite healthcare providers telling her she was too young for that type of screening. At 46, she was diagnosed with breast cancer.
As we went through some more testing and started some treatments, we realized it was actually terminal. So it was stage 4.
Every year, more than 22,000 women will develop breast cancer, and 5,000 will die, according to the Public Health Agency of Canada. Those numbers, coupled with a doctor shortage, are a worrisome combination for Canadian Medical Association President Dr. Kathleen Ross.
More than 6 million Canadians don't have access to a primary care provider. This means that there are chronic diseases, acute illnesses like cancer that will fall through the gaps and present with later diagnoses. This is critically important we address this issue now.
Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
Turning from friend to foe. Coming up, Donald Trump's former vice president takes aim at his old boss. Welcome back. Donald Trump has become his party's presumptive nominee in his quest to return to the White House, but he's now facing criticism over his platform from a former ally who stood next to Trump during his 4 years in the Oval Office. As Reggie Cicchini explains, it's part of a broader shift in the Republican Party.
And we want to have unity, and we're going to have unity.
Donald Trump is the Republican Party's presumptive nominee, but deep beneath the surface lies cracks in that unity.
I cannot, in good conscience, endorse Donald Trump in this campaign.
Mike Pence was vilified for not overturning his old boss's 2020 loss, but the reasons behind his cold shoulder in this election are a set of deep convictions, shaping his decision to not back Trump.
Donald Trump is pursuing and articulating an agenda that is at odds with the conservative agenda.
Trump's non-committal stance on abortion and recent 180 on a TikTok divestment jostled the longtime conservative. His non-endorsement now falls in line with previous Republican vice presidents.
There has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump.
There are a number of conservatives for whom the word conservative matters more than the team jersey they have on at the moment.
Whatever fractures do exist in the foundation, election are unlikely to make a difference. Primary results show that Trump's supporters shrug off or even embrace his controversies, highlighting how he's erased the GOP's past to rewrite himself as the new establishment.
Trump has really wrapped the base, so to speak, around his finger.
Entrenched as his voters are, Trump's liabilities may become a hurdle in the race towards November.
A not insignificant percentage of Trump voters have said they will not support him if he's criminally convicted.
That could provide wary Republicans with an ability to clear their conscience come election day, even if it leaves them with no political home.
They give other Republicans permission to say, you know what, we don't like either of the guys at the top of the ticket. We'll take it past this time.
Reggie Cheney, Global News, Washington.
Putin's prolonged rule. Still ahead, we'll speak with a Canadian journalist about the mood in Moscow as Russians head to the polls.
You've got the best deals on delicious food. Order now.
Food Panda, food Panda.
Voters in Russia are heading to the polls this weekend in the country's three-day presidential election, which ends tomorrow. The event amounts to little more than democracy theater. Any serious opposition challengers have either been prevented from running, are in prison, or dead, including, of course, Alexei Navalny. As a result, Vladimir Putin is guaranteed to win, extending the Russian leader's decades-long rule. August 9th, 1999, a fresh new face enters the world stage. Vladimir Putin, son of working-class parents from St. Petersburg and a former intelligence officer, is appointed Russia's acting prime minister. Less than 5 months later, Boris Yeltsin's resignation opens the door for a new Russian president.
I looked the man in the eye. I found it to be very straightforward and trustworthy.
But as the years progress, Putin tightens his grip on power, determined to restore Russia to its former Soviet glory, whatever the cost. In 2008, Putin declares victory after a short war with Georgia, then again 6 years later annexing Crimea, all while amending the constitution and extending his term limits. Putin has now paved the way to remain in control of the Kremlin until 2036. That would surpass the ruthless reigns of Joseph Stalin, even Catherine the Great. And joining us now from Moscow is Fred Weir, a Canadian journalist who has lived and worked in Russia for 38 years and is now the Russian correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor. Fred, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. We know the results this weekend are effectively a foregone conclusion, but what are you watching for?
Well, yes, even some Russian official commentators describe it more like a referendum on Vladimir Putin and his policies than any kind of competitive election, because it is far less than elections in the past, which did have some element of competition, some kind of serious opposition that got to use the election as a platform to express their ideas. There's none of that here. So the things that we will look for, I think, are turnout, first of all. And secondly, there could be spoiled ballots. You know, the opposition are urging a boycott, but others say turnout, vote for anybody but Putin, and there are 3 other candidates on the ballot, or write in the name of Alexei Navalny. You'll spoil the ballot, of course, but the spoiled ballot will be counted as a spoiled ballot.
Right, so symbolic protests, and we're also expecting to see a very real protest on Sunday. It's hard for us these days to get a clear read on how ordinary Russians are feeling about their president and the war in Ukraine. How would you describe the mood in Russia these days?
Well, it is hard, even being in the middle of it, to gauge public opinion and what people think. But I think when you say ordinary Russians, I think the majority of them are fine with the way things are. They're not enthusiastic about the war. But my sense is that most Russians think, first of all, it's distant from them because the sanctions don't really bite in everyday life, and the war is far away. And unless you know somebody who's on the front line or something, then it doesn't affect you. But there's a small and a very vocal minority who are sort of pro-West, liberal-minded people who have not accepted the regime that Putin has built.
Journalism is risky business these days in Russia, of course. To my knowledge, I think, Fred, you were the last Canadian journalist left in Russia. We've seen other journalists arrested, kicked out of the country for coverage critical of the Kremlin, even just for calling Russia's invasion of Ukraine a war. How are you feeling? How are you doing these days as a Canadian journalist operating, working in Russia?
A lot of people don't talk to foreign journalists anymore, people who used to. That is a problem. It's getting to be more like Soviet times were in that respect. And at the beginning of the war, I was careful. You know, I had to put special military operation in quotation marks instead of saying war and so on. But I stopped doing that. I write more or less freely, and I don't seem to get any repercussions from it. It's Russian journalists who are in the straitjacket now. If you're a Russian journalist today, you're going to have to mind your P's and Q's very carefully, because trouble can come for you. I don't think the Russians care much about us, but about Russian journalists, yes, they do.
Well, we certainly care about you, and really appreciate you taking time to talk to us here today, Fred. Fred Weir, who is a Canadian and the Russian correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor based in Moscow. Thanks so much again.
Thank you.
Up next, the strange story behind this furless friend raising eyebrows in Nova Scotia. Cities across Canada and the U.S. are going green, getting ready to celebrate St. Patrick's Day tomorrow. The Chicago River received a dye job today, a tradition that has carried on for 7 decades. While Tampa, Florida also got into the spirit for its River-O Green Festival. Both cities say the green coloring is safe for the environment. Well, the unique appearance of an animal in Nova Scotia is attracting attention. This is Rufus, and believe it or not, she is a raccoon. It's hard to tell without that trademark mask and bushy ringed tail, but a wildlife rehabilitation center has taken her in and says she has alopecia.
We do see it in squirrels and other species. Even humans have it. So it is out there. It's it's genetic. So we do need to see whether we can help this raccoon.
Staff at the center say they're amazed that Rufus made it through the winter without fur, and they attribute it to her feisty nature. They're hoping her hair will grow back with some rehabilitation. Get well soon, Rufus. That is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is the Bay of Islands in Newfoundland and Labrador. We love seeing your Canada, so please keep emailing your photos to viewers at...
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amish Skill 5858. I'm a good name. Have a good life.